Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Danny and it's time. We're gonna do Chonky Check In number 2. If you guys haven't seen the first episode, I will be sure and link that for you guys. This is essentially a series that I started on my channel that I go through very slowly, where I want to focus on reading chunkier books. And to me, that means books that are over 500 pages. And so I wait until I have read or DNF'd 10 of the chunky books that are on my TBR, and then I talk to you guys about them. I want to promote these books. I know that they can be intimidating for people, and I just want to give them kind of their own platform, so that if you are interested in reading some of these, that hopefully this will give you a little bit of encouragement to pick them up. So as I mentioned before, I do include DNFs on this list, and so I'm going to talk about those first, and then we'll go upwards from there in my ratings. So my first book that I'm going to mention to you guys is probably the most disappointing one on this list, and that is The First Binding. I DNF'd this book. I talked about this in a previous video. This is 850 pages, and it was marketed as a book that was inspired by The Name of the Wind, which I dearly loved. And so I picked this up with high expectations. The last book that I read that was marketed this way was The Empire of Silence, which was my favorite book of 2022. And so I wanted to pick up more books that were inspired by The Name of the Wind, because I just thought, this is going to be like my niche. I'm going to really enjoy these. And that didn't happen. So I got pretty far in. I can't remember how many pages I got to, but it was a lot. I think it was over 200 pages. And it might have even been more than that. But anyway, that's not the point. What the point is that this is not a Name of the Wind inspired book. This is a Name of the Wind ripoff. And I say that in the nicest way. I'm sure that the author of this book does dearly love The Name of the Wind and just wanted to use that as inspiration for their story. But it was so similar to the plot of The Name of the Wind that I could guess what was happening or what was going to happen. I could guess who did said events and who, like, where they were going to head next. So I've read a couple of reviews on this that really stick up for this book, because a lot of people that have rated it poorly do say that it is just a carbon copy of The Name of the Wind with different mythology. And those people, the people who have rated it highly, say essentially that Patrick Rothfuss doesn't own the rights to a specific plotting device that he uses, which is that one of their characters is telling their own story, and they are, like, in The Name of the Wind, you have Quoth, who is telling his own story to chronicler, and you are listening as the story is being told. And I completely 100% agree that Patrick Rothfuss does not own that plot narrative, or that narrative device. However, I do think that I think it's frustrating that the significant plot points in The Name of the Wind happened in The First Binding. It's not a unique book. And I know that every story has been told in its own way, but I feel like there are ways to make your story original. So anyway, I have 10 books to talk about, so I'm gonna move on from this. This was definitely my most disappointing on this list. But if you enjoy Name of the Wind and you don't mind some repeats and storyline, this book might be for you. The next book that was a DNF, and this was also really disappointing for me, not because I'm irritated at the book by any means, but I really wanted to love this, and that is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. So this book was 836 pages, and I did DNF it at 125 pages. This one I recently read. And I just think the way this book was written, the style in which it was written, I don't know that I have the language to describe what I didn't like. You are in the 1800s, if you've never heard of this book, and England has lost its magic. Not lost its magic in the sense of, like, it's gone somewhere, but lost in the sense of there are no practicing magicians anymore. And it's alluded to the fact that magicians have helped in the past with, like, wars, and there were practicing magicians that had, like, real magic, and now there is a society of magicians who really just read about magic. And so the book is about bringing magic back to England and making it more respectable, because as of right now, practicing magicians are known as charlatans who essentially are stealing from people and are lying about the powers that they have. And so you have, within the first 125 pages is all I can tell you about, you follow Mr. Norrell, or Norrell, I think is how they pronounce it. And he has magic. He actually is a practicing magician, and he wants it to be a respected craft. And his powers were super interesting. There were scenes where statues were coming to life. There was an illusion that he created, or not even an illusion, a boat that he created and people he created out of rain. But none of that is the focus of the story. The focus of the story is the sniveling, pompous men in this magician society and in English society in general who are so pretentious, and that is your focus. And I just kept getting so frustrated that and maybe that's the point. Maybe the point is where's the magic? I want the magic. And that's what that will eventually lead to. I also just didn't enjoy Mr. Norrell's character, and I don't think you're supposed to. He's kind of crotchety and pretentious himself. And I definitely found that was true. Sorry, my cat just jumped down in front of me. So I was kind of sad that I didn't get to Jonathan Strange's character, because I believe he's supposed to be the more charismatic of the two. But I just couldn't, after 125 pages, I kept picking the book up and I wanted to read something else. So the last DNF on this list, and then we'll get to some books that I really did enjoy, is The Final Strife. So this is 832 pages, and I don't remember. I just recently talked about this on a video. I don't remember how much I read. It was definitely over 100 pages. And I was very frustrated with this book because the storyline is about 3 girls, each of which have a different type of blood. And so the empire that they are in has a caste system according to blood type. Not blood type in our sense of blood type, but they have red bloods, blue bloods, and clear bloods. The red bloods are like the elite class, then you have the blue bloods, and then you have the clear bloods. And each class has its past. And so you hear about rebellion within the blue class, also within the clear class, and I'll just jump to the point where the reason I ended up DNFing this was because the clear bloods end up, because of the rebellion that they've had in the past, every time a clear blood is born, they are tracked and they have their hands removed and their tongues removed. And it's such a devastating thing for that class of people, but they have learned to live within the parameters they've been given. And so they have kind of a sign language that they use to talk to one another, which was really intriguing. But that character, the girl who is in that class, we don't really get to follow her. We follow the red blood and the blue blood, which I found their characters very frustrating and irritating. They were both very spoiled in their own way, or I should say one of them was spoiled in her own way. And then the other was just, I don't know, not willing to learn, or she was very closed off from the people around her, but I don't know, she was just very frustrating. So I ended up DNFing this as well. Once again, this was another book that I kept picking up, and I was eventually okay, I want to read something else, so I'm going to read something else. Next, we jump to 4 stars. So a very large jump between my DNFs and my next reading. I will say the first book that I'm going to mention, after thinking about it and being away from the book for a little bit, I do think that my rating would probably be more around a 3.5. But I'll leave it at 4 because that's what I originally rated it. That is Fairy Tale by Stephen King. So this is my first Stephen King novel. This book was 608 pages, and I really enjoyed the first half of this book. Was fantastic, and it would have been 4.5 to 5 star if it had continued in that light. You follow a boy and a grumpy old man, and the grumpy old man has a fall, and the boy ends up having to take care of him. And so that is the start of the book, which does not sound like a fantasy book or a fantasy horror novel that it becomes, but there's a portal world that ends up being introduced. The relationship, so I am not a contemporary reader by any means, but I think that the relationship between the boy and the old man in the first 50% of the book was very well done, and I liked, like, that felt like a contemporary story to me, and I really enjoyed those components, the relationships that are formed. I just thought it was fantastic. And then we get into the portal world, which was fun, and it was interesting and engaging, but I feel like there were some things missing. There was that relationship aspect missing within the portal world, because you meet some really cool characters within that portal world, but they just don't feel as fleshed out as the first half of the book. So that's why I think it would probably be more of a 3.5 now versus the 4, but I still really enjoyed it. If it sounds interesting to you, if you are a fantasy reader that has never read King but wants to give him a try, I do think that this is a good starting point. I got a lot of people saying that that should not have been the first King that I read, because it's not his traditional story, but I think that that's why I wanted to go into it with that, because Stephen King intimidates me. Like, I don't know that I'm going to appreciate his writing style. And so I wanted to read something that was a little bit more in my wheelhouse. And this met that bill. Next was The Fall of Babel, which was the finale to the books of Babel. The first book is Senlin Ascends. This was 636 pages. I rated this 4 stars as well. And this is another one that, if I think about it, the further I get from the book, the more I do think that this was probably more of a 3.5. But once again, I'll leave it at a 4. I can't really tell you much about this book, being that it's a finale. I'll tell you about the first book. Senlin Ascends is a book about Senlin and his young wife, who go on a trip to the Tower of Babel. And the Tower of Babel it's a tourist attraction, but each level of the tower has different components. And he essentially loses his wife, and the book is about him trying to get her back. And so he ascends the Tower of Babel to try and get his wife back. And I really enjoyed, I think the first book was probably my favorite in the series. I do think that this is a very dense read, and I think that I waited too long to read the last book, which is why my enjoyment level wasn't as high as some of the previous books. There is a lot going on, and the further you get into the books, the fact that all of the books are very dense and character heavy, and those storylines are all brought together in the 4th book. I think that I should have like taken notes or like went in and read summaries prior to reading the 4th book. So that is no fault of the book whatsoever. I do think that this is a really fun fantasy. I think it's very different than any fantasy I've read, and that's why I think a lot of people, this series is very polarizing. People either love it or hate it. And I am on the side of love it. I don't think that it is the best series I've ever read by any means. And I don't think it is, you know how certain books are just consumable, like you can just read and read and read and read and read. I think these books you really need to take your time with. And so I think that's what one of the frustrations is when people pick these up. They don't expect them to be as in-depth and, well, dense is the word I would use, as they are. But I really did enjoy the series. There are a lot of really fun things, or not fun, devastating things that happen, but like interesting things about each of the levels of the tower. And the more that you learn about the system of the tower and the politics, but I don't want to call it family dynamics, but like the dynamics of how the tower works is really intriguing, and not an aspect of the series that I was anticipating going into it. So if that sounds interesting to you, I would say give it a try. I really do think that it's a good series. The next book is The Hunger of the Gods, which I rated 4 stars. This book was 656 pages. This is the second book in the Bloodsworn saga. The first book was The Shadow of the Gods. This is another really dense fantasy, but in a different way. This is, I think, Norse mythology inspired, if I remember correctly. And there are these massive gods. This is the second book in the series, so I won't tell you much about the plot of The Hunger of the Gods, but The Shadow of the Gods, you follow multiple characters. I think there's three POVs that you follow, and they're all within the same world, and they are coming together in the climax of the story. And so the background of the land that they are in is that there were massive gods, and you can see them on the covers. So Hunger of the Gods, I believe, has a large wolf on the cover. The Shadow of the Gods had a large dragon, and those are actually gods that they had in the past that would lend powers and abilities to their followers and people with their bloodline. And so you have these people who are called tainted in the world, who have the blood of the old gods. The old gods are all dead, but the bones of those gods give people powers as well. So there is like this hunt for the bones of these gods, and there is like backstories going on that involve the tainted bloods. And one of the characters that you follow is tainted, and they kind of take on the power of their god. So like if someone is tainted by wolf blood, then they can become quite wolfly, which affects like hearing, eyesight, it affects strength, it affects the ability to kill. And so that part was really fascinating. I do think that these books take a while to get into. I really enjoyed the audio because of the fact that they are so long, but I really liked having the audio alongside reading the book. So I liked that immersive reading experience, because some of the names in this book, I do think that if I had just had them on audio, they wouldn't have stuck quite as well. And yeah, I don't know much else to tell you. There are some characters in this book that I really enjoyed. You have Orca, who is one of the perspectives that you follow, who in the first book, her son is kidnapped, and so you follow her on her journey to get her son back. You follow I can't remember what they call him, but it's a trader, is that it? Anyway, he escapes, like he was enslaved, he escapes from slavery, and then he joins the Bloodsworn and travels with them, and they are kind of mercenary crew, I think is how they're described. And yeah, so it's just all these culminating storylines that come together with this massive world and these massive gods that have died in the past, and how they connect to all of the humans and the politics that are involved in their land. The next 4-star is Bone Shard War. So this is the finale to the Drowned Empire series, which starts with the Bone Shard Daughter. And I do think that the Bone Shard Daughter, the first book in the series, was my favorite because it has horror elements mixed in, whereas I think book 2 and book 3 really don't. And I would say I think that the last book is probably the weakest in the series, but it was still a good time. I won't tell you much about the third book because it spoils some of the things in the first book, but if you've never heard me talk about the Bone Shard Daughter, you follow 5 different POVs, one of which is the Emperor's daughter who is having memory issues, and she has to have her memories back in order to take over her father's throne. And so you follow her trying to figure out what is wrong with her and how to get her memories back, also how to learn bone shard magic, which is the magic that her father uses to keep the empire under his thumb. And you also follow some other characters throughout the empire, so you know what's happening outside of the castle or outside of the main area, and you know that ships are, or you know that islands are sinking. You know that there are people going missing. And one of those people is a character's wife. His name is Jovis, and so he is looking for his wife and traveling to different islands and just trying to get by. And so he's the second main POV. The other 3 are very much side characters, but you still follow their POVs. It's such a not groundbreaking, that's not the right term, but it's like a genre bending series that I really, really enjoyed. So yeah, if it sounds interesting to you, I would definitely say give it a try. The next 4-star is Last Argument of Kings, which is the finale to the First Law trilogy. So this series starts with the blade itself, which I rated 4. Before they are hanged, I gave 5 stars, and then the Last Argument of Kings I gave 4. So I do think that middle book, which is interesting, was the best. And there's not much I can tell you about the series because it doesn't really have a plot. At least that I can tell you without you having started the series. You follow, I think, 3 main characters in the first book, but you do add an additional character or maybe a couple of additional characters at the end of that book. And they are once again in a world that turmoil is happening. You have wars from the north and wars in the south, and there are things that are happening within this kingdom that are out of people's control, and you are, how do I even want to describe this? You also have magic magic users in the world. There are not very many of them. You have kind of old gods. It's very similar to the Shadow of the Gods as far as like the setup of the world goes, but it's very different in its narrative style. Joe Abercrombie does a really good job of character development. Not that I don't think John Gwynne does, but it's just a very character-focused story with the Blade itself. And I really, really enjoyed these characters. I will say, this is grimdark fantasy. If you guys have never read a grimdark fantasy, it is definitely not going to be, like, I don't want to say it's not a happy ending, but it's not like, it isn't a storybook ending. Some of the things that happen in this book are very realistic and very bleak. But in a good way. I have said on my channel that I really don't like when stories only focus on the bleak and don't focus on anything else. Not that I think that this story is like light bringing by any means, but I just think that some of the things that the characters want to happen, if they do or don't, like the character growth is still acknowledged. And yeah, I don't want to spoil it for you guys. If you are interested in grimdark fantasy, I would definitely say pick up the series. And if you are a character-driven reader, I would definitely say pick up the series because the characters in this are just fantastic. And the last 4-star read for me is Fourth Wing. So I know a lot of people are hyping this book up. This book has so much hype. I mean, it's insane. The fact that people can't even purchase this book. And if you've never heard of Fourth Wing, which I doubt, but it's about a girl who, her mother, or I shouldn't even say a girl, a woman who, her mother is the general of an army, and she has a disability that makes her bones very brittle and her muscles and ligaments very sensitive to breakage and ripping and things like that. And so she has always not been the war type of person like her mother would like her to be, and her mother wants her to be a dragon rider. And so she ends up being forced into this tradition to become a dragon rider, which essentially ends with her becoming a dragon rider or her dying. And so there are trials that she has to go through. There's schooling that she has to go through. Also, all of the dragon riders that go into this school, or the potential dragon riders that go into the school, are like killing each other because it makes them have a greater chance of bonding with the dragon at the end. This book is very consumable. It is a super fast-paced read. There's a romance involved. I thought that the characters were really interesting and enjoyable to read from. I loved Rhiannon's character, I believe is how you pronounce her name, which was like a friend of the main character, Violet. And I think that the love interest, which I won't say his name, but I think the love interest in the book, the main love interest, because there's, I guess, a couple, I thought his story was very interesting as well. There are a couple of things that prevented me from giving this book a 5-star rating, and one of those is there is a culminating event that happens at the end of the book. And I'm not talking about, if you've read the book, I'm not talking about the thing that happens on the last page, because I think that that's pretty intriguing, and I'm interested to see where that goes. But there is a culminating event that happens the last, I don't know, 5 chapters of the book. I didn't pay attention to when it started, but I don't think it was led up to very well. I don't think that we had, essentially, I think the world building in this book was not as good as it could be. I think that the dragons and the explanation of the dragons in this book were intriguing, but I think that they could be expanded. And I hope that in the second book we focus more on the world now that we know the characters and we know kind of the intentions of certain people. I hope that the second book does focus on more on the world building, because I think I could really enjoy that. Not that I didn't really enjoy this book. I thought it was good. I don't think it was a 5-star book. I don't think it sounds mean, but I don't think it's worth the hype. Like, I think that this is a good book, but I'm not sure why it blew up like it did. It is very consumable. I like the characters. But I think that there were certain pieces in this book that we got to them and we were just supposed to accept that certain things were real and that you had breadcrumbs along the way, which there were some, but I think that we needed more. So I hope that they expand upon that in the second book. And lastly, my only 5-star read for this Chonky check-in, which was a reread, and that is Mistborn: The Final Empire. So I have started my Mistborn reread, and my goal is to get through all of Era 1 and Era 2 by the end of the year. That's probably not going to happen. I'm probably just going to get through Era 1 and then continue into Era 2. I've read, I think, up to the first 2 books in Era 2, and I didn't want to continue on with Era 2 without reading through the universe again, or that world again. So, The Final Empire, if you guys have never heard of Mistborn, you are essentially in a world where the bad guy has won. And so the world is very downtrodden and you have people in slavery. If the people who are not in slavery, if they are not of the noble class, they are pressed for food and a job, and you have a rebellion essentially brewing. And you have a girl whose name is Gwynne, and she is kind of a street urchin. She grows up on like a thieving crew, and she has this ability to change people's minds. She calls it luck. She is essentially, or you will learn very quickly in the story, that she is a person in this world who has powers to use different metals to affect different things in the world. And they explain all the magic systems. One of the things that Brandon Sanderson is known for is his magic systems. They're very intricate and he explains them very well in his books. And I just really love this story. You follow Gwynne essentially being pulled into the rebellion and being trained by another person who has her abilities. And it's a very fun story. I think that Brandon Sanderson's best, well, I shouldn't say best, but I think Brandon Sanderson is very accessible for people who've never read fantasy before. So if you are interested in reading a fantasy novel and you maybe are intimidated by large fantasy worlds, even though this is a large world, I think Sanderson comes at books in a very accessible way. It's not over complicated. He explains things very well and it's not convoluted. So I think in the last Chonky check-in that I gave you guys, I gave you some more chunky, like a chunky TBR. And I'm not going to do that this time because honestly, I don't know what books I'm adding to my TBR. And so I need to think about that first. So I might do a separate video that's like chunky TBRs, and that will be something else that we can kind of add to like our Chonky check-in series. So I need to do some research to figure out what books I have on my TBR already that are considered chunky, and then also add some more to my list. So if you guys have any chunky recommendations that you'd like me to check out, or if you have any chunky books that you've absolutely loved in the past, that either I have read or that I haven't read, please put them in the comments down below. I would love to chat with you guys. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you have a lovely evening, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.